World News, yesterday and today, Tuesday, July 21st, 1920. And now, John Charles.
Hello everyone, I'm John Charles. Since the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand and the outbreak of World War I in 1914, both England and France made a concerted attempt to increase their presence and dominance in the Middle East. The outcome of the war and the peace negotiations left Britain with a mandate over Palestine. Today, we will trace the extraordinary events that led up to that occupation. The first steps towards England's control over Palestine came as a result of a series of correspondences between Sir Henry McMahon and the British High Commissioner in Egypt and the Sharif of Mecca. For more on the story, we go to our correspondent Brandon Delsid in Medina.
Well, John, with the outbreak of World War I, the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia were engaged in their efforts against the Central Powers, the Germans, the Austrians, and for a time, the Italians. The Ottoman Empire, who controlled the Middle Eastern Arab countries, sided with the Central Powers. To put pressure on the Ottoman and to keep them distracted, the British engaged the Arab regions who had long sought independence. Well, if independence is what they wanted, independence is what they were promised by the British High Commissioner in Egypt. In 1915, Sir Henry McMahon, in a series of letters to the Sharif of Mecca, which came to be known as the Hussein-McMahon Correspondence, promised support for Arab independence from the Ottoman Empire. In exchange for Arab support of the Britain and their allies in the war, with what they thought were solid agreements, the Arabs supported the British and French to victory. And as you know, John, the Sharif later became known the King of Hijaz.
Thank you for that report from Brandon Delsid. While the British High Commissioner had promised the Arabs independence in 1915, 1916 brought a new twist to the path of British occupation of Palestine. We have learned that the British and French met and developed a secret plan to divide up the Middle East after the war. That report, called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. We go to Cameron Heath in Paris.
Thanks, John. The British diplomat Sir Mark Sykes and the French diplomat Francois Picot met with their approval of their government and mapped out a post-war division of areas of influence for the Middle East. This secret agreement became known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement. While Syria and Mesopotamia were to be independent from the Ottoman Empire after the war, the area was to be divided into spheres of influence, with Syria falling under the French influence and Mesopotamia under the British. Also, it was under the Sykes-Picot Agreement that Palestine was to be held separate and under international administration. Let's go to Amber Greenhouse for a look at how this Sykes-Picot Agreement would have been divided up in the Middle East.
Well, Cameron, as you can see from the map, the French and British did a good job dividing up the Middle East amongst themselves, with a few crumbs going to the Russians. The north, while it would become independent, would fall under the influence of the French, and south, under the influence of the British. Interesting is this little area highlighted in yellow. That is Palestine. From the beginning, Palestine was meant to stand separate from the remainder of the Middle Eastern squabbles. Under the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Palestine would fall under international administration. Now back to John Charles in the studio.
Thanks, Amy, for that illuminating report. The progress of the war was slow. There was no progress on the Western Front. The Arab uprising the Sharif of Mecca promised the British proved to be of little military value. The possibility loomed that a peace would have to be created with Germany, leaving them unbeaten and poised to pick up the struggle again at a time of their choosing. Securing the outer defenses of Egypt rose in military priorities. Those outer defenses meant Palestine. To entice the support of anti-Turk Jewish settlers in Palestine, the British War Cabinet adopted a posture of strategic Zionism and released the Balfour Declaration in November 1917. I think we have a reading of that declaration.
November 2nd, 1917. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with the Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours sincerely, Arthur James Balfour.
Needing a good reason to secure the outer defenses of Egypt, the British government launched a Zionist strategy. Promising a Jewish national home in Palestine would offer a permanent defense by a colony of Jewish settlers who, according to author John Darwin, were fiercely anti-Turk. The fall of Russia opened an opportunity for the Turks to threaten Persia and the Suez Canal. Palestine became a strategic buffer. Before the end of 1917, the British had secured Palestine. 1918 brought another party that wanted to influence the future control of the Middle East. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, preparing to enter the war, communicated to Congress his 14 points of negotiation encouraging self-governance of the Middle Eastern countries. This began to dissolve agreements between Britain and France, as outlined in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. This caused the French and the English to release a joint declaration in November of 1918. Let's go to Kim Cornwall in the field.
In Anglo-French Declaration of November 1918, the two governments continue to separate the Arabs from their Ottoman rulers. Together, the two countries declared the object aimed at by France and United Kingdom in prosecuting the East, the war let loose by the ambition of Germany, is the complete and definite emancipation of the peoples so long oppressed by the Turks, and the establishment of national governments and administrations deriving their authority from the initiative and free choice of the indigenous populations. John, back to you.
The final disposition of Palestine appears to have come with the 1922 Treaty of Sèvres. For more on that story, we go to Sèvres with our reporter, Nikos Argitakos.
Well, John, it looks like most of the parties were finally in agreement when they adopted the Treaty of Sèvres. The Allies, among with what was left of the Ottoman Empire, agreed that Palestine would fall under a British mandate that would administer Palestine. Article 29 of the treaty expressively said, "The mandate will be responsible for putting into effect the declaration originally made on November 2nd, 1917, by the British government and adopted by other Allied powers in favor of the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people." John, the mandate clearly ratified the Balfour Declaration. Back to you in the studio.
That was Nikos Argitakos in the field. Joining us in the studio is graduate history student Mike Briggs. Mike, is the Treaty of Sèvres the end of the story?
Well, not really, because that treaty was never ratified.
Really? Well, then what was the point?
Well, Britain has long sought to expand its imperialistic holdings. It really valued Egypt as its strongest hold in the Middle East, and I think that they long wanted to hold and get Palestine. I think one of the reasons Britain got in the war and stayed in the war was to secure more security around Egypt, and they identified Palestine. They invaded Palestine, they took Palestine, and they didn't let go, at least through the period we're talking about, which is 1922.
Well, that's the way it is. Join us for the news of yesterday and today.